New research on cognitive engagement in retired professionals is showing something the wellness industry hasn't yet translated into useful content. And if you've been noticing something different about your thinking since you left work, a slight slowness where there used to be sharpness, a word that won't come when it used to arrive immediately, a sense that decisions that once felt routine now feel like more effort than they should, and you've been telling yourself it's probably just age. This video is going to reframe that, not to alarm you, to give you something more useful than alarm, a specific explanation, and a specific direction. There are 5 structural conditions that research consistently associates with accelerated cognitive decline in retired professionals. Not 5 symptoms of aging, 5 conditions, most of which are present in the way retirement is currently being practiced by the majority of high-achieving professionals who leave without a framework for what comes next. By the end of this video, you'll know what they are, why each one matters neurologically, and, more importantly, what to do about them. Now, to understand what's actually happening here, here's what the research shows, and what almost no retirement content bothers to say clearly. The brain is not a storage unit. It is not a library of things you learned, sitting quietly on shelves, waiting to be accessed. It is a dynamic system that is continuously shaped, built up or drawn down by the demands placed on it. For 40 years, if you were in a senior professional or leadership role, your brain was operating inside one of the most cognitively demanding environments a human being can inhabit. High-stakes decisions with real consequences. Complex information arriving faster than it could be fully processed, requiring judgment rather than calculation. Relationships that required reading people accurately, navigating competing priorities, and communicating under pressure. Novel problems, not the same problem repeated, but genuinely new situations requiring genuinely new thinking. The neuroscience on this is specific. Brains that are regularly exposed to that level of demand develop what researchers call cognitive reserve, a kind of neurological buffer that delays the expression of age-related decline. The mechanism works in both directions. Build the reserve through consequential, novel, socially complex engagement, and the brain stays sharper, longer. Remove the demand abruptly, completely, as retirement typically does, and the reserve begins to draw down. This is not a theory. A pattern that keeps appearing in longitudinal studies on professional identity transition is that the rate of cognitive change accelerates in the period immediately following full retirement, particularly in individuals who retire into low-demand environments without replacing the structural conditions that kept the brain performing. The key phrase there is structural conditions, not age. Not genetics, not character, structure. And that distinction matters more than almost anything else in this video, because structure is something that can be changed. With that mechanism in place, here are the 5 signs. Each one is a specific, observable pattern. Each one has a neurological explanation that has nothing to do with your age and everything to do with the environment your brain is currently operating in. The first sign is reduced tolerance for complexity. You were someone who managed complexity for a living, competing priorities, ambiguous information, decisions that had to be made before all the data was available. That was not just your job. It was, neurologically, the primary input keeping your prefrontal cortex, the architecture of executive function, calibrated and sharp. When high-stakes demand disappears, the brain doesn't hold that calibration out of loyalty to your career history. It adjusts downward toward the demand it's currently receiving. Which is why decisions that would have taken you 30 seconds in a meeting, a logistical choice, a financial question, a scheduling conflict, now feel like they require more energy than they should. That is not cognitive decline in the clinical sense. It is the brain recalibrating to its current environment. The environment changed. The brain followed. The second sign is word retrieval slippage. This one frightens people more than the others because it feels like the first sign of something serious. It is worth being precise about what it actually is. The specific kind of word retrieval difficulty that correlates most strongly with early neurological concern is pervasive, progressive, and accompanied by other functional changes. What retired professionals typically experience in the first 1 to 3 years after leaving work is something different, a reduction in verbal fluency that correlates directly with a reduction in high-output verbal engagement. You were, for 40 years, someone who spoke with precision in high-stakes environments. You gave presentations. You ran meetings. You negotiated. You explained complex things to boards, to teams, to clients, to regulators. Language for you was a professional instrument, sharpened daily by use. When that daily use stops, the instrument dulls, not because anything is wrong with your brain, because the practice stopped. The distinction matters. One is a medical concern. The other is a structural one. The third sign is shrinking time horizons. High-achieving professionals spend their careers thinking in quarters, in years, in strategic cycles. The planning faculties of the brain, the systems that project forward, anticipate consequences, and build toward something, are not passive. They are trained by use, like any other cognitive function. When there is nothing consequential on the horizon, no project with a real deadline, no decision with real stakes, no initiative that requires you to think 6 months ahead, those faculties begin to atrophy. The observable sign is subtle but specific. The future starts feeling shorter. Not philosophically. Practically. You find yourself thinking in days rather than months. Filling time rather than building towards something. The planning horizon collapses not because you've given up, but because the brain efficiently stops maintaining capacity it isn't being asked to use. The fourth sign is social cognitive dulling. This is the least discussed and possibly the most significant. For 40 years, you operated in environments that required sophisticated social cognition, reading people accurately, anticipating reactions, managing relationships across competing interests, navigating the subtle power dynamics of institutions. That is not a soft skill. It is a demanding cognitive function, one that research consistently identifies as one of the strongest protective factors against age-related cognitive decline. The social environments that most retired professionals inhabit are, by comparison, cognitively flat, pleasant, familiar, low stakes. No one needs to be read carefully. No competing interests need to be navigated. Nothing consequential is being decided. And the neural systems that were kept sharp by that complexity begin to quiet. The fifth sign is motivation architecture collapse. This is the one that underlies all the others. For your entire professional life, the external environment provided the structure that organized your effort. Deadlines, deliverables, accountability, the expectations of the organization, the team, the client. You did not need to generate your own motivation from scratch every morning. The structure generated it for you. Retirement removes that structure in a single day. And what most high-achieving professionals discover, usually around 6 to 8 months in, is that generating sustained motivation from the inside, without external demand, without consequence, without an audience, is a fundamentally different and far more difficult cognitive task than anything their career required of them. The brain's dopaminergic systems, the architecture of drive, reward, and forward momentum, were calibrated to an environment of consequential demand. Remove the demand, and those systems don't automatically recalibrate to leisure. They search for the signal. And when they don't find it, the result is not peace. It is the specific restlessness that brought most people navigating this transition to content like this in the first place. Now, this is where things get important. The standard advice for brain health in retirement is not wrong exactly. Stay active, stay social, keep learning, do the crossword. But it is insufficient in a specific and important way, and understanding why is what changes what you do next. The brain doesn't need stimulation. It needs consequential demand. There is a difference, and that difference is everything. A crossword stimulates. Running a project with a real deadline, a real client, and real stakes, that creates consequential demand. A dinner with friends stimulates social connection. Navigating a complex professional relationship across competing interests, that creates the social cognitive load the brain was built to operate under. Stimulation keeps the brain occupied. Consequential demand keeps the brain calibrated. What the research on productive aging consistently shows is that the cognitive protection associated with continued engagement is not a function of keeping busy. It is a function of being needed, of operating in environments where your thinking matters, where something real depends on it, and where the stakes are high enough that the brain has to work. That is what your career provided automatically for 40 years. And that is precisely what most retirement frameworks do not replace. Not because the frameworks are careless, because they were designed for a different era, for people who retired at 65 and lived to 72. Not for professionals who are going to be cognitively active and neurologically hungry for another 25 to 30 years. The framework was wrong, not you. If this video opens something you want to address specifically, there is a protocol in the description built exactly for this. It's called the brain on purpose, a science-backed daily structure designed for professionals navigating this transition who want to maintain and expand cognitive performance through the kind of consequential engagement the brain was built for. Not a wellness routine. A cognitive longevity protocol. The link is in the description and in the pinned comment. So what does replacing the structure actually look like? Let's look at 3 specific conditions, drawn from what the research identifies as the active ingredients in cognitively protective engagement. Not a job, not a return to what you left. 3 conditions that can be built into the next chapter without an institution, without a title, and without anyone's permission. The first condition is consequential output. The brain needs to produce something that matters to someone other than yourself. Not a journal entry. Not a creative project with no audience. Something where the quality of your thinking has a real effect on a real situation. This is why consulting, advisory work, and mentoring are not just financially valuable for professionals navigating this transition. They are neurologically valuable. They restore the mechanism the brain was optimized to operate inside. Your thinking goes in, something real comes out, and the stakes are high enough that the brain has to work. The second condition is novel complexity. The specific kind of cognitive protection that research associates with delayed decline is not the repetition of familiar tasks. It is the encounter with genuinely new problems, situations where existing frameworks don't fully apply, and new ones have to be developed. This is not about learning a new language or a new instrument. Though those are not harmful, it is about placing yourself in environments where the complexity is real, the novelty is genuine, and the problem hasn't been solved yet. The third condition is social authority. Not social activity. Social authority. Environments where your judgment is sought, where your perspective carries weight, and where the relationship requires you to read, adapt, and navigate. The specific cognitive load of being someone whose thinking is needed is different from the cognitive load of pleasant social interaction. Both have value. Only one of the two replicates the neurological environment your brain was built for. The good news, and this is worth sitting with for a moment, is that the expertise you built over 30 or 40 years positions you to inhabit all 3 of those conditions more easily than almost anyone else in the market. You don't need to build the credibility from scratch. You don't need to learn a new field. You need to find the structure that makes what you already are available to people who need it and cannot get it anywhere else. What you're protecting here is not just your memory. It is your capacity for the kind of life you actually want for the next 2 to 3 decades. The brain that stays sharp, stays engaged, stays needed. That is not a medical outcome. That is a life. If the signs in this video landed in a way you want to address specifically, the protocol in the description was built for exactly this moment. Link in the description and in the pinned comment. Which of the 5 signs landed hardest for you? And when did you first start noticing it? And here is what this video was actually about. Not 5 alarming things to worry about. 5 specific, structural, reversible conditions, each of which has a neurological explanation that has nothing to do with your age and everything to do with the environment your brain has been operating in since you left work. The research is clear on this. The brain does not decline on a fixed schedule determined at birth. It responds to its environment, continuously, dynamically, and with far more plasticity into the later decades than most people have been led to believe. What that means, practically, is that the 5 signs described in this video are not sentences. They are signals. And the question worth asking, the one that replaces the vague fear you may have arrived with, is not, am I declining? It is, what environment am I giving my brain to work inside, and does it match what my brain was actually built for? The restlessness that most professionals in this transition have been treating as a personality problem. The inability to simply settle, the persistent sense that something important is still unfinished, is not a flaw. It is not ingratitude. It is not an inability to relax. It is the brain signaling, accurately and insistently, that the conditions it was built to operate inside have been removed, and that it is ready for them to be restored. Your restlessness is not a problem. It is a signal. And the signs in this video are not evidence that something is wrong with you. They are evidence that the framework you were handed, retire, rest, enjoy the time, was designed for a world that no longer exists, for a life expectancy that no longer applies, for brains that were never as capable as yours. The expertise doesn't retire. Only the title does. What comes next is not the slow management of decline. It is the deliberate construction of the conditions under which the brain you built. Over 40 years of consequential, demanding, high-stakes professional life continues to do exactly what it was always best at: working on something real that matters.